Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the SQL Professor. Today we're going to dive right in with our SQL Basics Part 2. We're going to cover case statements, the union statement, column aliases, and calculations. Let's get to it. So again, I am looking at SQL Server here. We have one database, SQL Professor, one table, the customers table, with some basic metadata about our customers. First thing I want to show you is the concept of an alias. You can see here I'm selecting the first name and the address from the customers table, but I'm calling the customer table by a shortcut, just C. It could be anything you want, large or small. It doesn't have to be one character. It doesn't have to be the same character that the table started with. It's just a way to have a shorthand. Because what's going to happen before you know it is you're going to have more tables than just customer. You're going to have orders per se, or order details, or any number of information depending on what your use case is. And as you start to pull in more tables into your select statement, it helps, and sometimes it's required, to say which table are you referring to. If there were two tables that had a first name, well, then which one are you referring to? And you have to qualify it. And you can qualify it, that's the terminology, by the entire table name and then dot. So it could be customers dot address, but it's simpler to just alias it here in the from statement, and then you can refer to it in the column list. So, this is going to produce what you might expect, just the first name and the address from customers. But this concept of an alias, you'll see its usefulness more and more as you start to add more tables into your select statement. So the second concept I wanted to show and introduce is the idea of column headings and calculations. So again, looking at the customers table, we have first name, but we want to call it something else, customer first name. The email address we want to refer to as email space address. Customer zip code, customer zip. And we have the city, comma, state, space, zip code as the mailing address. You can see two different conventions here, or really three. As, and then in quotes, the table name, the email followed by the column heading in brackets, or the zip code as, and then the column heading in brackets. All three work. Select this, and you go ahead and you can see how you have all of the different customer names, their address, their zip, and then their mailing address. This is a calculation. It's a string concatenation, city, comma, state, space, zip code, and it pulls it in just fine. And you now can refer to it by the mailing address name. So all of these work as different ways you can add more flavor, more specificity, more information to your select statement. So you'll see I have the select distinct state from customers. This was in here because I wanted to pull out the time zones. And so what I did actually in preparing for the video is I have my 20 states. I looked up the time zones, and you can see what we have here. What I'm building out is a case statement, which is the next thing I want to be able to show you. You have your first name, your last name, your state, and then case. And based on certain conditions, what do we want this last column, which we're naming time zone, to show? Well, when the state is in one of these states, then show Eastern. When the state is in these states, show Central, show Mountain, show Pacific. Otherwise, if it doesn't match at all, show missing data as time zone. again, from our single customers table. So if I run this, you'll see I have all 101 rows and their time zone. Missing data because I purposely left California out to be able to show that. If we don't have an else statement, I just comment that out and rerun this. You'll see it comes back with a null, meaning unknown, meaning nothing matched, and it's not going to invent something. It's not an empty string or a blank space. It certainly doesn't go up and look up the zip code, or the time zone rather, for California. It just says null. It's unknown. So all of the Californias in our row, in our table, are null. So if you add California, of course, run this again, you'll see now we have California as part of the Pacific time zone. Case statements can be pretty powerful. You can do a lot of different things with them. Obviously with one table here, there's only so much you can do, but you can have different conditions here, different results after the then statement. You can have arbitrarily large amount of whens. You can have the else, and then we're naming it with that column heading concept we introduced earlier. A couple other things I want to show in this video is the into. So you can select the first name and the last name, and I want to create a new table. This hashtag indicates it's a temporary table. We'll explain and explore that in a future video. So it doesn't really exist in our database. It actually exists in a separate database maintained by SQL Server itself. Still have a where clause. Pull out my 20 rows that are California customers, and if I want to see who my California customers are, there we go, all 20 of them. So now you can create a separate table, and now you could manipulate two tables, if you will. This temporary table will persist as long as your SQL Server session is active. Once I close this window, the temporary table will go away. Last thing I want to show you is the concept of a union. Well, two things maybe. One, I never showed a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment is very similar to many other programming languages. I'm old enough to remember this as the way to denote a comment in a C programming language, but there's others, of course. The union statement allows you to concatenate the results of two different select statements. So actually, let me start with this. Select the last name and first name from California, union with last name and first name of Georgia. Let me select the first one. Again, 20 rows, no surprise, since we just did that with the temp table. And there's two Georgia customers. So if I went ahead and run this both, I only get 20 rows. Well, what's going on here? If you get something you don't expect, remember I had 20 rows with just California. Where are my two Georgia customers when I run this statement? Well, let's find out. Let's do a couple things. If you add the keyword union all, a union all will show all including duplicates. By default, union strips out the duplicates. And so just so we can see what's going on, let's go ahead and put our state back in and say union all. Okay, so Chloe Davis is not a duplicate, so she should have shown up. There's only one Chloe Davis, matches first name and last name. I go down here, there are two James Scotts, one in California and one in Georgia. So the union statement will, especially when I did not include the state, the union statement will strip out and only return one of those. There's also two Jack Martins, Jack Martin here and Jack Martin here, and they're both in California. But that doesn't really matter for the union statement. If I were to remove this and say, okay, I only want the unique ones, but I include the state, and run this, I'll get 21 rows. Because now our two James Scotts are unique because I included the state. The two Jack Martins, both from California, are not unique. So it's going to pull that duplicate. And that's a really interesting concept, that the union statement will remove a duplicate from either one. It doesn't have to, what you typically see a duplicate, a union statement used for, is when you only want one or the other, not both from two selects. But if either of them have a duplicate in itself, and you don't specify it, so if we go here, remove the state, and I just say union, we're only going to get 20 because that one duplicate that's within California and Georgia gets removed, but then also the duplicate within the California result set gets removed. So we actually have 19 Californians and one Georgia here in this result set. So be careful with that, but union is a very powerful SQL statement. You'll see that a lot as you move forward. To recap, we've shown aliases, column headings, calculations, the use of a case statement, some of the variants if you include the else statement or not, moving data into a separate table. In our case, we introduced the temporary table. Multi-line comments just so they're mentioned, and then spend some time with a union statement. All of these are different modifiers and different complexities around the select statement. And there's a lot more where that came from. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.